Welcome back to the Impact Driven Leader podcast. This is your host, Tyler Deckerhoff. Glad you're here. Glad you're tuning in. Glad you're listening. Today, special episode. See, we thought the last episode with Seth Madison was going to be the final episode for season 3. Well, here's a bonus episode for you. This is my conversation with Damon Lembi. Damon is the CEO of the organization Learn It. He also wrote this book, The Learn It All Leader. We discussed that, and it's about mindsets, traits, and tools of a learning leader. This is what I'm excited for. This is a special episode because this conversation with Damon, I couldn't wait until next season. Why? We have some changes coming. We have some expansions coming. We have some exciting new things. You're going to see a different studio. It also looks a little different than you're going to see in this conversation with Damon because we've updated a little bit. Going to continue to update. Here's another thing that I want to drop with you before I get into this episode with Damon is the Impact Driven Leader Journey. It's a course that I am releasing. It is available now. So go get it. Go to my website, tylerdeckerhoff.com. You'll be able to find information about that course. We're going to be sharing that into the new year. It really is the start to whatever journey in the Impact Driven Leader community. And before I go any further, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being a subscriber. Thank you for being a listener. So far through this show, we've continue to grow year after year after year. As of last, over 30,000 downloads. Hey, I'm just starting. I'm really trying to figure out what I'm doing, but I know this. I know you're listening in because you've gotten tremendous value out of my guests, such as Damon. One piece of information, valuable information that Damon shares that I want to highlight before getting into the conversation is the pace of change has rapidly increased. So think about that as you listen to Damon. I'll catch you at the end. We'll wrap it up and we'll give you some parting notes from this bonus episode of season 3 with Damon Lembi. Damon, thanks for joining me, man. I'm excited for this conversation. We've spent a few moments getting to know each other, learning about you and your family. It is Halloween. We are recording this and you are going to be the Tin Man. We won't get into that. I already told you that I won't. But man, I'm so excited to be here with you and to learn about you, learn about your organization, but more importantly, you shared already a tidbit. We'll get into that later. As far as really this idea of why leadership and learning are so intertwined, and they're almost, you can't be a leader without learning, is where I'd love to start.
Great. Well, first of all, Tyler, thank you for having me today. And yes, I didn't show up. My 6-year-old daughter, Lucy, really wanted me to show up in my Tin Man outfit. And your listeners would probably think that's pretty odd if this episode comes out later on in the year and like, why is this guy dressed like this? Anyways, so the correlation between leadership and learning, the question you just asked is, I think it's crucial because you look at today, the rapid pace of change, and leaders have to continuously evolve, continuously learn and grow. If you feel like you have it all figured out and you've hit your ceiling, you're going to get passed by. And that's why I tell a lot of individuals from the get-go that really I believe that learning agility, the ability to learn, is one of the top skills and most required skills today and in the future of work.
Oh, I love that. I mean, one thing that I stop and think about, and obviously Learn It, the space that retooling, teaching, skill, development and enhancement for, executives and whoever else. One thing that I look at today we're in this, you are a part of it, and we're in this massive sea of change in regard to what does education look like going forward? Education in regard to the worker. Is it classic university? You and I both went to college. We had that experience. My kids, or even more imperatively, your kids in another 12 to 15 years, what's education post-high school going to look for them? And I think you just nailed it. It's like, if we are teaching learning agility and understanding things are moving so fast that you can't learn something today in your, whatever education and think it will be applicable in 3 to 5 years. It's learn today, apply it tomorrow, and then relearn is really what I just gathered from you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, Tyler, you look at the lifespan of a skill used to be 3 to 5 years. Now it's down to, it's close to 6 months. And it's interesting that you bring up that question about what's education going to look like in the future. I had lunch just yesterday with a gentleman who's really involved in higher education, and he feels like that, in the upcoming future, universities are going to have to pivot, and they'll probably be Learnit's competitors. Learnit, we're a corporate training business, but universities are going to have to adapt and learn that skills change, and maybe even get into some type of subscription models where people can graduate, but then they able to come back and continue their process of learning and evolving.
Okay, so I didn't intend for it to go this way. We're here, we're at this crossroad. I love it. One of the conversations I've had recently is this idea of education returning, workplace education returning to the apprenticeship model. And, it's this idea that if we go to college, yes, we learn how to learn, we learn how to be a great student of Learnit curriculum, but yet, can it be applicable, or am I learning on the job? So I would love for you, kind of this grand vision that you have in regards to Learnit. What does your future relationship look with the organizations you work with in order to be this continuous learning? Say, hey, hire that employee that's 18, 19, 20 years old, that's highly motivated, wants to learn. We will partner with you to develop them, because that's really what people are looking for, right?
Right. Well, I think that's a great question. I'm a big believer that really real learning takes place in real time. It's great. Look, we talked about this before we started recording. I love reading books. I love watching documentaries. That's all great. But when you roll up your sleeves and do the work, that tends to make the retention and stickiness and learning from failures. If you take my organization, for example, we've been around for quite a while, 28 years, and I've been really, really fortunate to bring through some incredibly talented individuals, some who've stayed a couple of years, some who are still here after 10, 15 years. And I've kind of looked at Learnit as like a training ground for individuals. So maybe not 18, 19, but let's say they're 20 years old, 23 years old, and it's their first job. And I've done my best, Tyler, to try to hire for potential over experience when at all possible. Get people with the right core values, the right skills, and help them evolve and grow into the type of employee that can be successful in your organization. And like I said, sometimes they stay for forever. Sometimes they leave here after 3 years and they cut their teeth at Learnit and they move on to some of these enterprise companies. But they're always going to be part of the Learnit alumni, which is great and something I've been really proud of. So I think that continuous learning and that continuous learning opportunity, especially pre-COVID, I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it's almost impossible for me to compete with Salesforce, Stripe, all these massive companies compensation-wise. But what I can do is bring people in, give them a lot of learning opportunities, and then also give them the space to try things, make mistakes, and coach them. So that's I guess that's our secret sauce for developing talent over the years.
I think one of the things there that, the tail end of that is if you go about it where you're not afraid if people move on and graduate and do something else. I believe it's have the incubator mindset. I'm going to incubate you, and you're either going to grow here or you're going to grow somewhere else, rather than incinerate them, where I'm just going to burn them out and find the next. But I believe, one thing that you didn't mention that I think happens, if you train those people up and they're working with other organizations, maybe they go on to that next organization that you're partnered with. All of a sudden they become a massive supporter of Learnit because you allowed that, but then they're also an in-house advocate to that next organization. I imagine that's happened for you already, but it sounds like roundabout in a bad way, that's kind of, again, that's our ploy, is we're just going to go be sending Trojan horses out there, but we're doing it because we're caring for people and allowing that.
Well, I love what you said right there. A couple things tend to happen if you're able to build a culture like that, where first of all, it's not great to burn bridges if somebody leaves, because I can't tell you how many times people have come back because the grass isn't always greener on the other side.
Yeah.
And I've always, especially if they did a great job and they left professionally, they communicated and they left professionally. Sometimes those are your biggest advocates, and they come back and they stay and they do a great job. And also, if people do move on, sure, in the business we're in, the learning and development world, they walk us in the door all the time. I like the Trojan horse analogy. And they, what they also do? They understand the kind of core values and culture that Learn It has. They're constantly introducing and inviting people to interview at Learn It. So it's been a great referral program. I mean, it's not really a referral program, but
it is
a referral pipeline.
Yeah,
it's been it's tremendous.
Yeah, I mean, here's something that I wrote down my notes is, where did that come from? Like, where did you have this thought and idea of building this supportive organization? Because there's some people that do, but there's a lot of people that you and I both know, if you leave, you are dead to me. Don't ever come back. Don't let the door hit you on your way out. Like, if you are going to take advantage of me because I poured so much into you, that mindset is toxic in my mind, but it's held. People still today operate in business that way.
I also look at it like cutting off your nose to spite your face sometimes too.
Yeah.
And it's hard. I mean, look, don't get me wrong. There have been times where you send somebody through a expensive training program, or you really put everything you had into working with them. I've got a couple. I mean, a ton of examples. And it gets you, you get them ramped up, you put all this effort into them, and then they go and they work, maybe not for your competitor, but a partner or something like that. I don't know. I just, I talk about it in my book a little bit, going back to it. I call it the trust tax. And what I mean by the trust tax is when you go into any kind of relationship, in a personal relationship, a professional relationship, you have a couple options. You can go in and you can be really cynical, like this person's going to screw me over, or I got to be skeptical, or I shouldn't really reveal myself to them. Or you can just go in open-minded and just think the best, that believe that people believe in people. And I think I learned that from my dad. He was somebody who just had a huge heart and just believed that people have the best of intentions. And sometimes, we have to pay the trust tax. Somebody screws you over, and whether they do that on purpose or maybe they don't even realize what they're doing. But I think that that's just what I mean, if you have 100 relationships and 95 of them go well, and then it's that 5% tax or whatever it is, 5% tax that you got to pay. It's just, I think it's just par for the course. But you learn and you continue to evolve, and not being naive, but I think that if you go in and you believe in people and that they have the best intentions, I think it's going to work out much better for you.
Man, I've seen that. I've seen that in different relationships in my life, and I'm a product. I agree. It's like I'd much rather trust people and know that I might get all right. They might screw me, but I don't think everyone is out there to screw people. And here, to use your example, maybe it is 95-5. But if I treat everyone like the 5, then 95 just got hurt. And I didn't develop the type of relationship where I went in always guarded. And I believe we're at that time and place now that if we're always guarded, people are like weary and they don't want to engage. They don't give their most. And I believe part of that as a leader is to be vulnerable. To be authentic and say, hey, maybe this is something I struggle with, but you know what? I'm going to believe the best in you. And if I'm wrong, so be it. But if I believe the best in you and that allows the best to come out of you, then we're both better off. And I think the alternative is just, it's sad and ugly. And yet I know people that operate that way. They constantly are afraid that someone's going to hurt them, someone's going to take from them, someone's going to screw them. And it's a miserable way to live, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it just takes so much negative energy to be that way, to always be on the lookout that you're going to be taken advantage of, or that somebody's got ulterior motives. And I think as a leader, this woman who worked for me, who now runs a very successful student debt, she's a CEO of a company that focuses on student debt. She wrote this great post and talked about how, I gave her first job out of school and how I believed in her. And, and what a big difference that made, 25 years ago. Now, 99% of her success is on her. I'm glad to be just part of that journey, but I think as a leader, if you can go in, and this goes in your professional and your personal life, but just believing in people and thinking that they have the best intentions until they prove you otherwise, you're going to be in a much better position. And if you don't, like you mentioned, you miss out on a lot of great golden opportunities to work with individuals.
Well, there's one piece tying back to this incubator and incinerator is, if you plant a seed in the soil, you take care of it, it'll grow. But if you put so much heat and pressure on it, it's not going to change. And I think that really is that belief factor. I've been a benefactor of that. Why am I doing what I'm doing today? Because John Maxwell and Mark Cole believed in me, and they told me the belief they had in me. That's the only reason I'm here talking to you today, because they saw something that I didn't see. There were other times in my life that I was constantly searching and yearning for that belief and validation, and it left me very guarded. It left me where my insecurities showed up most, and I think that happens to a lot of leaders. You reference it as the imposter syndrome that often hits people. And as I've learned more about that the last several months, it's kind of this mix. All right, is it truly imposter where I don't feel like I'm worthy? Or is it embracing, it's like, hey, you're doing something you've never done before. You shouldn't understand it. You talk about in baseball, you move from third to first base and you're playing and you're like, all right, one of them is your natural position, the other one's not. And you get over there like, do I know what I'm doing? I don't really know. But someone believed in you and said, go do it. And that was enough for you to say, okay, if they believed in me, then I can rise to their belief. You smile. That brought back some good memories, did it?
Well, interesting memories. I think. I had one question for you, John Maxwell and the other gentleman you mentioned. How do they communicate to you that they believed in you? Did they say, "Hey, Tyler, I believed in you," or how'd that work?
Yeah. So I've built through the process of leadership growth and trying to grow a very close relationship with the Maxwell organization. I've done a lot. And it just came through different instances. There was a time that my wife and I were in London with John, and there's a picture of us, and John's walking with us. He has his arm around both of us, and he's just pouring into us. And that awesome. Image really helped me solidify the definition of empathy, which is putting your arm around someone and walking with them. That's how I define it. I believe that's a great way to, if we're going to display it, do it. And, they both have told me, man, we believe in you. Now,
I think that's...
being around them enough, and in your case, being around your dad or your grandfather, your coaches that you talked about, you were around them enough to know, all right, they're not just telling me this because that's what they tell people. They truly do believe this, and they want the best of me. And you mentioned this, the Hall of Fame coaches you had. Like, how much do you remember those instances where those coaches did it in their own different way, and how did that affect you?
Well, I think, I was really fortunate, and I talk about in my book, I played for 3 Hall of Fame coaches, but I also had some individual other coaches. One that really comes to mind is John Pearson, JP, who was a hitting coach at Arizona State. Okay. And he, similar to like John Maxwell with you, he kind of just took me aside when I first got to Arizona State, worked with me, and having somebody in your corner that really believed that you belonged to be there was really, really important. Going back to the imposter syndrome, I think we all have our inner critic and self-doubt, and where I really struggled at it in baseball, I kind of bounced around from Pepperdine, and when I ended up at Arizona State, it was my last shot. It was my last opportunity, really. And I was like, well, I don't, do I belong here or not? But what I learned through that experience, and I'll share right now, is like a 3-step approach that I talk about in my book, 3-step approach to overcoming imposter syndrome that at least works for me. And, the first step is working hard. I don't think that you can cut any corners. And I'm not talking about working 10 to 14 hours a day, but really putting in the hard work and being consistent. Number two, I would say, is focus. Really focusing in on what your task at hand is, deliberate practice, not procrastinating and going off in different directions. So those are the first two steps. And then when it comes time, and let's say, you have self-doubt around managing a team or a new team or a sales presentation. Well, once you've put in the hard work and you put in the focused, deliberate practice, you've prepared. So now go into the presentation, go into whatever it is you're doing, managing this team, and kind of, I like to say, learn and let go, right? So don't think about the techniques or any of this other stuff. Just go in, give it your best shot, and if things work out, fantastic. If you fall on your face, you can learn from your failures and move forward, but learn and let go, and don't be too hard on yourself. You gave it your best shot, you prepared, and just let it fall where it may.
That as I'm thinking about that, separate yourself from the result. If you've done the work, you've done the focus, you feel like you're prepared, you have to at that point separate yourself from the result, because you understand that failure is possible. We're still
human.
Touching a little bit about baseball and thinking that, hey, the greatest hitters of all time, 70% of the time, roughly, failed. And it's understanding that, hey, if we embrace that in our life in some way, is the quotient going to be that high? Probably not. But yet, if you always learn from it, if, going back to either fielding or batting, or in your case, you talk about hiring people, not hiring people, handling those situations, it's like, there are times, absolutely, I am going to fail. But if I've done the work, I've focused, and I'm prepared, then there is always something to learn from it if I separate myself and my ego, my value from the result.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I like what you said, separate yourself from the results. And I also look at it like sometimes, you're worried that if you fail, you're going to be embarrassed or people are going to laugh. Keep in mind, people have their own lives. People they don't really care. They might think about it for a minute or two, but then they have to focus on themselves. And that's just something that I had to kind of teach myself, that I'm not the center of the universe and everybody's focused on me all the time. And I think that that's really helped in situations where I've struggled, wondering if I belonged or not. I just put in the effort, do the best I can do, and then kind of congratulate or celebrate yourself for the work, the process you put into it, regardless of whatever the results are.
So, kind of a major transition, but it's a thought that just hit me. And we're talking about this. We're talking about this, separating the results, doing all those things. But I want to know more about how you, Damon, and Learn It see this current economic leadership landscape and saying, this is what we need to be prepared from. This is the work we need to do. This is the focus we need to do. And in some ways separate ourselves to this point from the results, but no, this is where we're going. We can either see from past experiences, 28 years, you've gone through some ups and downs, the dot-coms to the Great Recession, to COVID, to all of it, to say, okay, man, we see some things here, but we also recognize what's coming inbound from your partners that are saying, man, we're ill-equipped here. So that's a big soup. That's just a lot that I just threw on your lap. But I'd love for you to kind of sift through that and kind of like give us an insight to, your leadership position today, leading the organization, but also trying to solve these problems people have.
Well,
there's a deep breath there.
I was just thinking, because it is like you mentioned. We started back in 1995 and rode the wave of the dot-com boom and then the dot-com bust, and then you saw the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, and then there's COVID, and now there's so much uncertainty in the world, whether it's what's going on around us or the economy, what's happened with going back to the office, not going back to the office. What is 2024 going to look like? And from a leadership perspective, what I've learned being able to survive and move through this is try to be as authentic and transparent with your team as possible. I think it's important to share as much of the facts or all the facts that you can, and not make it some rosy picture that maybe it's not, but also be positive with it. Say, hey, here's what we're seeing, and I also think that it's important, Tyler, for leaders. You mentioned the word vulnerability a little while ago. I think it's okay. I think it's important for leaders to be vulnerable. It's kind of a paradox because I think vulnerability requires self-confidence. A lot of leaders are afraid to admit, especially 10, 20 years ago, you can't admit that you don't know everything, that you have it all figured out. Otherwise, that shows weakness. I think today it's okay to say, and I'm fine with it, like, I don't have the answers here. I need to go out and surround myself with as many talented people as possible, give them what they need, get diverse opinions, and really listen to what they have to say, and not be afraid to admit that. Now, vulnerability also means to me, if you make a mistake, yeah, sure, you need to admit that you make a mistake, but don't over-apologize, right? Don't over-apologize and consistently tell people that you're making, I'm sorry about this, I'm sorry about this. I think it's important to be firm in what you do and as a leader, and also be humble enough to say, hey, I could use your help. Let's figure this out together.
So where do you see helping people grasp that? I embrace it. I acknowledge it. I'm a champion of exactly what you just said. But I also recognize in my interactions with people, in knowing the world that we live in, that's not true in every case. I mean, It doesn't take long to look across the work landscape. So, as an organization, what are you guys focusing on to help from top down organizations embrace that ideology and embrace that style of leadership?
At Learn It, I'd say what we typically like to do is we want to work with a lot of the customers we work with is to help them have a learning mentality. Understanding that you never have it all figured out, and it's important to change your habits and your behavior and be okay with change. I think that's an important one, and that it's okay to have uncertainty and make think about big decisions, but make bold moves too. You can't have decision paralysis. You need to really think things through. One of the tips I talk about in my book is something called purposeful awfulizing, where let's say that there's a big decision that you need to make. Fast forward a year out and think about the worst case scenario that happens, right? Can you survive? Can you get through the worst case scenario? If you can, and like Jeff Bezos says, you have 70% of the facts, then maybe it's time to be decisive and make a move, and go for it. Now, if it's something that you're uncertain of whether you can survive or not, then you should go back to the drawing board and find an alternative solution. And I think that is a lot of what leaders are having to go through these days, is that there's so much uncertainty out there, and there's so much navigating change that you just got to do your best to figure things out and be decisive when you can, and also realize that what might have worked 5 years ago doesn't work now. So you got to evolve, whether it's fully remote work, whether it's hybrid work, trusting your employees, changing things up. Everything's different, and it's going to continue to be different.
I got a bit of a wry smile because I remember how you told that story in the book. I'll leave that after party secret, that story for anyone that reads the book, because it's funny, it's good. So that's just the snippet. You got to get the book in order to hear that story. But I appreciate you sharing that.
Guns N' Roses. For you,
yes, correct.
For you Axl Rose fans.
Yep. And so I will just leave that. You got to read the book to learn that. But one thing there that you mentioned, and I wrote this down, and I'd love for you to kind of break it open and share maybe what you guys do, what you've seen other organizations that embrace this learning mentality. And let me, let me deposit that there. Let me give it a little bit of water and a little bit of sun. Many leaders feel like I don't have time for that. My expectation is I have all these other responsibilities. So often, whether it's in my roundtable, others like, to have the time to sit down and read the book, to sit down and think, to sit down in a small group and let's talk about these ideas. Unless it's a structured meeting, I have a real hard time devoting or justifying it. Okay, that's a reality that I know that leaders struggle with. So going back to the learning mentality, like what would you propose as here's a system, here's what we've seen within Learn It, or what we prescribe to, or what we've seen organizations that partner with us that really embrace this, leading as a entire culture, learning as a culture as part of your actual workday. Okay, that's a lot of framing. The house is all built. Come in and sit down.
I love the question. And the first thing I would say is that learning isn't easy. It takes effort. It takes work.
Yeah.
You use the analogy of somebody trying to get in shape, right? So you have the individuals who will go to the gym once, jump on the treadmill and run as fast as they can for 45 minutes and then not jump back on the treadmill again. It's kind of like an organization who they do one corporate retreat for an hour. They carve out 1 hour and they want to cover 9 different topics, everything from self-awareness to productivity to, how to manage change. That doesn't work, and that's not going to work. What in order to really believe in learning, I think that the leadership needs to look at it like it's an ongoing process. And what we've tried to work with our customers on, as a lot of organizations have PTO, paid time off. What we say is you should have LTO, learning time off. Carve out time, consistent time throughout your team's work month where and you give them the space and the opportunity to learn the skills that they need to be really successful in their job, in their career. And it's really gonna pay off, because if you look at a lot of the customers who come to us, and I'm sure the same is with you, is they come to us, more in a reactive mode where they do their, biannual pulse survey, and people are leaving and they're saying, there's just not enough learning opportunities here. My personal growth is stunted. And what I say to leaders who aren't investing not only in training, like purchasing training from people like companies like Learn It, but also investing in giving them the time and the space throughout the organization to do it, is it's going to cost you in retention. Attrition, the cost of losing great employees and having to hire and rehire, I don't know the exact statistics, but it's probably a good, 2 to 3x sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think that going back to what we talked about, it's not a one-off situation, and it should start from the top and throughout leadership, is constantly be giving your team members the opportunity and yourself to learn and improve your skills. And unfortunately, in days like what we're seeing now with layoffs, it's even more critical, right? So even if you had to downsize your team, well, guess what? Those tasks and those responsibilities, they don't go away. So you need to take the team that you have and help reskill them to cover those responsibilities. Plus, it shows the existing team that you believe in them and you're motivating them through learning opportunities. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, well, I think, it spurs along other thoughts. And it's like, if our solution is at some point we might have to lay people off because, we want to restructure, it's, I believe this. It's like you can either run a budget as opposed to we need to limit our budget in order to meet, limit our expenses to meet our budget, or we can maximize our return. I always think it's better to maximize return because I've always heard this, that, and taught this, is like you can only cut so much and eventually you kill the cow. And, when you do that, then you have no more milk. So it's kind of like you can only cut so much. And I think what you're talking about, if we're giving opportunity to reskill, maybe using AI to figure out what task does that reduce, so we're not doing so many manual tasks, that we can actually offload it into some type of AI. Well, now we can start doing more for a greater return. We have more skill and value in that person. And it was only because we learned through through time to get there, instead of like, now we're screwed, we have to go figure out how to do this. Well, there's no time to do it.
Right. I think you brought up a really good point there. A lot of the conversations we have, I was at a conference last week, and it was we spoke a lot about AI. Is AI going to take over the world, are the robots going to take all the jobs? I'm of the camp, it's too early to tell, but I'm of the camp that people aren't going to lose jobs to AI. Individuals, they're going to lose jobs to people who have leverage and learn how to use AI. Because like you mentioned, I really believe that AI is going to help streamline, automate some of these tasks, that it's going to give the humans the opportunity to be able to do higher level skills. And it used to be people, now it's going to be people plus machines as we move forward in the future of work.
Yeah, and I think that's another challenge where I think some of the most outspoken are, AI is going to take my job, are people that were told for a generation, go to college because that's the only way to make something of yourself. And we've totally dismissed an entire generation of physical labor that machines haven't been able to accomplish yet. You look at trades and artisan work that is exceptional. It takes a tremendous amount of skill, but my generation, I think kind of you were on the front edge of that as well. It's like, man, don't go do that, because then you're going to be worthless. And now all of a sudden we're paying that price, because it's like, we can only have so many computer engineers, science engineers. Like, all right, we've saturated that market, but by virtue of it, we have other industries that are dying for people because they don't have, and we see trades work. And it's all of a sudden, it's this rebalancing, and it's going to open up opportunities, but we need to be aware of that. And part of what you guys do is help retool that.
Absolutely. No, I think that there's a lot of opportunities out there. And, I think 4-year universities and all of that, that's fantastic. But, not everybody has the opportunity to go to 4-year schools and get fancy degrees. And for those who don't, there are a lot of, there has been a big pivot into moving into different trades and picking up skills. And now more than ever, that organizations no longer, for the most part, even require these 4-year university skills. And, one comment that I make to some of the individuals that I mentor is going back to imposter syndrome or self-doubt. Tyler, let's say that somebody sees a job that they think they'd be fantastic for, but they don't feel like that they qualify for all the, the qualifications or the requirements. Well, they should apply anyways. And see what happens, because a lot of times those jobs, those requirements, they're just nice to haves, not have to haves. And give yourself an opportunity to meet with the hiring managers. I think especially they said that women tend not to apply for jobs if they don't meet all the qualifications. I'm a big believer that get yourself out there and in front of the hiring manager, and you'll be surprised at how often it will work out in your favor.
Well, I think to that point, we've learned that just because you have the qualification doesn't mean you're a fit for this organization.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes, as I heard this, it was one of my guests, I can't remember exactly which one, maybe it was Dave Dodson, the manager's handbook he wrote, is talking about don't hire someone that wants to move laterally. Because then they're just going to be doing the same job. There's not that intrigue to learn, right? To learn something new. It's like hire someone that aspires, that doesn't have the skills, but the desire and wants to learn. And I think you kind of really encapsulated that, because if you're listening to this and you want that next role, prove that desire by saying, hey, I know I don't have it, but I'm willing to get there. I'm willing to learn. I want to be here because of the qualities, the values, the things that you as an organization stand for. I want to be a part of that. Just tell me where I fit.
Yeah. I think a lot of times when we're looking to hire and we work with our customers and they're looking to hire, you start more with the core values. Is this person a strong fit for our culture? Because I think it's tremendously important, especially if you have a learning culture, especially if you have a positive, collaborative culture, because you put one rotten apple in there, it ruins the whole bunch, right? So. And I'm also a big believer in when we bring people on board, I'll say, I don't want you to come in and just be on train tracks. Like you said earlier, don't be on train tracks. I want you to make mistakes. I want you to try things and make mistakes. Even sometimes we can even celebrate them or laugh about them. But if you're on your train tracks and you got your blinders on and you're just doing something, that's not what's gonna move your organization or Learn It forward. We want people who are willing to try and do things differently and learn, continue to learn. And also challenge the status quo. Always be. I talk a lot about this in my book. I think curiosity is such an important trait. Curiosity, asking questions, saying, "Is this really the best way to do something?" Those are all things that, especially when you bring people into your organization with the right culture fit, can add tremendous value to you.
To your point, I made the note about you mentioned curiosity. I believe it is the greatest skill or value that a leader can have, because it keeps you from being that know-it-all, that protective, let me march off my little territory. This is my territory. I own it. When you're curious, you're like, what's the world about? What else is out there? And I believe that's a skill, but it's also a value that can't be celebrated enough within organizations. Have those people that are curious. Well, why is it that way? Because that's the only way, in my opinion, that innovation or change or the ability to overcome obstacles can happen, is be curious to say, well, what if?
Yeah. Get curious, ask questions, and I heard a great saying: it's better to be interested than interesting, right? And just interested. And Tyler, I really believe too that you can learn something from everybody you come in contact with, everybody that you meet or have a conversation with, whether it's a cocktail party, whether it's a networking event, whether it's the office. There's something, they're more of an expert at something than you are. And so I think people who really value curiosity and are strong listeners, it really can help them learn and grow and evolve.
So to wrap up our time, right before I hit record, and I said, man, I hate when I do this, and I don't hit record, and you shared an absolute nugget. This is the time for it. So you had shared, you use a tool. You asked me, let me preference it for the listener, the viewer, so they can get a full grasp. So we were talking about the different books behind us and the different books we love. And you said, well, do you like physical? Do you like Kindle, like Audible? And I'm like, I'm kind of in this place where it's, as much physical, so I can highlight, a little bit of Audible, but it was a good story. And you shared a tool that you use that I want the listeners to hear about. I'm going to make sure that I get it right away because I think it's phenomenal. So you are teed up. It's that little ball that's just that white ball with those red, seams on it that I think you can hit. It's right on the tee for you. Let's go.
Yeah. Well, one thing I could never hit is a golf ball. Put salt on the tee. But hopefully we're referring to a baseball.
Yeah, the baseball tee. Yes, the baseball tee.
So, anyways, what we're talking about is like we mentioned beforehand. I mean, I try to read 35 to 50 books a year. I love reading, love learning, but I've always struggled, like I think a lot of people, with retention. How do you actually retain what you've read? And so a couple of years ago, I came across this app called Readwise, and it's great. So what I do is I use I read mostly my business books on a Kindle, and I highlight on the Kindle. And what that does, it then exports or imports into Readwise, which gives you about 4 or 5 prompts a day that you can just get in the habit. I get consistent of just going back, and it helps me remind what I highlighted. Back in the physical books days for me, you make all these highlights and dog-ear the pages, and you never really refer to them. So that's one trick one hack that I do to help retain is by using Readwise, the app, to go through the highlights. The other thing that I do, and I'm fortunate to, I think as a learning organization, learn it. It's important for us to, walk the walk. We do a lot of internal learning opportunities, and a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take a book. Let's say, I think we did this a couple months ago, Adam Grant's Think Again, and I went through, and I have I have 100 highlights from my Kindle version through Readwise, and I exported those, and I took a group of them, and we all did a virtual lunch and learn. And I gave each team, broken into groups of 3, so there's about 25 people, groups of 4. And I said, here's these 4 highlights. I want you to think about it for 20 minutes and come back and present how this correlates or impacts either your personal life or your professional life. And I think that helps with retention, right? You have these highlights because then you're actually putting them into use in the real world.
Oh, I love that. I love the application, but it is so much of, you mentioned this in the book, I believe it, is you learn the most when you teach it. Yeah. And I believe what you just said is a platform, a tool to be able to teach what you're learning and really, again, have those, all right, what does this really mean? How can this be applied? So thank you so much for sharing that.
It's kind of a selfish thing, right? It's selfish in a way. It's like, okay, I read this book. I'm really excited about it. Now I have this captive audience that I want to, maybe it's not selfish. I want to teach it back to them. So I'm sharing the knowledge with them, but I'm also enhancing what I've learned. So it sticks and you don't forget it.
Yeah. Well, Damon, thank you so much for your time. I have enjoyed this time with you. I enjoyed reading The Learn It All Leader. Make sure if you're listening to grab that book. Thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, Tyler. It was great being here today.
Highlighted in the open that one thing that Damon pointed out was that the pace of change has rapidly increased. So as a leader, our necessity to learn more and faster is there. Now, here's what I know. We can't learn it all. And sometimes that means we need to put people around us that they have the capacity to learn more, be experts in what we're not. See, the leader of the old usually knew more before they were the experts. But what we found and understood now is there's almost too high of a capacity for leaders and organizations to know it all. They need to know what they know it very well, but then rely on information and or the viewpoint of others to discern and learn more. And I think that's what Damon really focuses on here. It's understanding that we can all continue to grow and learn, but there's 2 caveats that I think are wildly important that he shares. One is you got to be authentic and transparent. Be authentic and transparent. Understand you don't know it all, but then you can go and learn and get better. Get better in areas that maybe at one point were just kind of nice to haves. Those personal skills, those soft skills, those empathetic skills. We just a focus on so long of technical skills. Now we realize, hey, let's be better at being around people, interacting with people, because that goes farther. And here's another piece that I love, that I encourage each of the roundtable members as part of the Impact Driven Leader community, is have learning time off. Have LTO. Schedule it. Is it an hour a week? Is it a portion of your day? Find time and find a way to do what you're doing right now. Listen to podcasts, take notes, go share it with someone else. Do a weekly session where you share with your team. That's where you can turn that learning into team building exercises. As I wrap up, I want to say thank you so much again for tuning into this bonus episode of season 3, episode 145. Thank you for being a part of the Impact Driven Leader community. I'm excited to share more in the new year. A little bit more updates. We have some exciting changes and growth, and it's just an enhancement of what we're doing, have been doing, because of the downloads, the desires, the champion that you have. If you got value from today's episode, could you do 2 things for me? Give me a rating and review. That's the best way for podcasts to grow, is people rating them, reviewing them. What do you think? How do you think? What did you think of Damon? And then number 2, if you got value from today's episode, go share it with someone else. Share it with them. Have a conversation. That's why I do this. That's why I sit here and learn and speak to wonderful guests like Damon. I hope you got value from it and that you can share with someone else. Till next time, have a good one.